Hi, everyone. You're listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM, Pittsfield, with Roberta McCulloch-Dews of the Mayor's Office in the city of Pittsfield. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we have with us Xavier, Xavier Jones, I should say, a premier executive chef, and he's also a personal chef, and Cindy Brown, Associate Commissioner of Regulatory and Veterans Affairs at Massachusetts Department of Education, Higher Education. But right now, we're going to kick things off with Xavier Jones. Welcome, Xavier. Let's get started.
Good morning.
So I always like to begin every interview with a brief background. So you're originally from Philadelphia, right?
Yes.
And you've lived in the Berkshires for about 19 years, right?
Yes.
Okay. So did you have any family in the area before you moved to the county?
No, not at all.
So I'm curious, why did you choose Berkshire County?
I had to do an internship when I was in college.
Okay.
And so you had to pick about 7 different places. Mm-hmm. I interviewed with 7. I got hired by 4.
Okay.
A couple places I did not want to go to, but I needed to just pick it to reach my 7. Mm-hmm. One was Tucson, Arizona, the Tucson Hotel. Mm-hmm. Another one was Sawgrass, Florida, right in Jacksonville.
Okay.
I also picked the Red Lion Inn in Stockbridge, Mass.
Okay.
I had never been to Massachusetts. So, being a poor city kid out of college, didn't have any money to travel too far. Massachusetts was the closest place, and they offered me room and board. So I came here.
How did you like it coming from Philly?
I didn't.
Okay.
It was a small, quaint, quiet, nothing going on. I was so used to going to sleep to fights and dogs and cats and alleyways and sirens and gunshots that I came up here and I was like, what is that noise? And people was like, yo, that's crickets.
It's called nothing. It's called silence. But there's something to be said for, just adapting to that. So I grew up in the Bronx and, I've lived outside of New York City for more than 20 years now. But, again, when I go back and if I'm visiting with, just friends or whoever, it's a difference. I mean, you definitely go to sleep with a hum of the cars racing, sirens. It's a different flow. And I have to say, I'm used to not hearing it, but I can adjust. But I could understand how it could be a big change. So at what point did you get comfortable in the area?
When I came back, okay. Every winter I would go home because it slows down. Mm-hmm. So I would go home and believe it or not, when I got home, I was like, man, I miss the quietness. And I would come back, late winter, early spring, and I was like, oh, this is nice, And then after doing it for so long, you start to get used to it. Right. And you start to adapt, to your environment.
Right. Okay. All right. So that was, and you predominantly stayed in South County?
For the first 2 years up here, yes.
Okay. All right. So I just want to share with our listeners that, Xavier, since he's been here, he's been, built a huge following throughout the Berkshires. And just some of the places that you've worked. You worked at the Red Lion. And you garnered experience in New England and French cooking. You've also worked as a sous chef, a chef de cuisine, or executive chef at the following establishments. So let's count it down. J Spice at its former downtown Pittsfield location, the Press Box, and Patty's Bistro. And outside of the region, you've worked for Mass's Ocean Bar in Chicopee, Viva Fresh Pasta in Northampton, and the Thirsty Owl in Saratoga Springs. So you've worked a variety of places. You have a ton of experience. And I just have to say something. You trained at the Le Cordon Bleu Institute of Culinary Arts in Pittsburgh. And I got to say, there's something about saying that name that just sounds impressive. Tell me more about your training.
School is great. It's very demanding. You're at school at 5 a.m. in the morning. Mm-hmm. And the training was really good. It's a lot of cooking, but on top of the cooking, they teach you, how to become in the hotel world. How to be better in the industry, not just to be a cook, because cooking is the easy part. Just because you know how to cook, it doesn't mean you're a chef. There's a difference.
Let's speak about that. What's the difference?
So the difference is, anybody can just go in and cook, but the chef, he's now building the menus. He's costing out. He has to understand, his P&Ls. He has to understand not just how to cook the food, but what is the difference between all these meats.
Right.
He is leadership. Sometimes as the chef, you are a babysitter, a counselor.
Okay.
You're playing mom and dad. You play so many different roles, but you are the leader, not just. And most chefs don't cook once you get to a certain point. A lot of them are not cooking anymore.
Is it because you're in the role of, I think to your point, you're encouraging the up-and-coming chefs? And why is that?
Well, because you are mostly overseeing. Making sure operations are going the way it's supposed to. As a chef, if you're tied down to one station, how can you know that your saute guy, your grill guy, your garde-manger is putting out the right food? So you're usually the expediting. You're making sure all the paperwork is done.
It's interesting because you probably start out in the business because of your love of cooking. And then there's this transition of sorts into the administration. So do you think that is something that can be hard for some chefs to adapt to because you're not necessarily doing the hands-on anymore?
It is hard for some, but you're still going in and butchering your own meat.
Okay.
You're still jumping in on the line and helping your guys turn out on a busy night when things are getting rough.
Okay.
You're not fully away from the kitchen, but after a while, you're saying, okay, everything that I created, all my work, and you're watching all these plates come into the window before they hit the table, and you're going, I created this. There's still some joy there, even though you started out just to cook. You are now like, okay, now I've trained these guys, all my training, and you're looking at it all come together.
Well, it's funny that you say that because I think any kind of creative person, there's a formula of sorts and a rhythm. And, I would think of also like a chef as a creative. And so when you are in the process of putting together your creations, do you find that you adapt to your own personal rhythm? Do you have something that, your own creative formula that you adapt to?
You have to, because it's your own personal art. You have to tell a story on a plate. When you're creating, any artist that creates something, they want people to look at it and go, wow.
Okay.
So when I'm creating a plate from scratch, I have to picture it in my head before I put it down on a plate. And then what's the story behind this? What are people going to say?
So you work backwards then. So you actually have what it looks like in your head, and then you get the ingredients, and then you put it together.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Is that like the standard process, or is that your process?
I don't know. I've only been trained by one chef.
Okay.
We've never sat down and had this conversation.
Okay.
So I don't know if anybody else is doing it that way, but whenever I'm going to serve a dish, I'm, like I have a party this weekend and I have a 5-course meal.
Yeah.
And I am picturing what each course is going to look like in my head, and how I want that plate to look like that's how I go and buy my ingredients.
So do your clients, do they say, okay, this is what we want, or do they give you free range to say, okay, I want a 5-course meal, you put it together, we trust you? How is that process?
If there's any allergies or if it's things that they don't like, usually you're not cooking for just a couple, usually for me, I'm cooking for 4, 6, 8 people. So we're usually in an email thread of everybody saying, okay, I really like this, or I don't like that. I can't eat crustaceans. Make sure there's no nuts, no seeds, or there's one gluten So once I get all that out the way,
Right.
then I create the menu. They give me the free reins to go and create that.
Wow. So, I mean, let's just talk a little bit about just the realm of being a personal chef, because obviously this is a segment where it's really popular for you. Is that something that you thought you would? Because we're going to talk a little bit about your restaurant, work and all of that. But it seems like your professional chef, initiatives, they're really popular right now.
Yes.
Is that something that you said I want to dovetail into, or you realized this was a market that you could tap into?
So to give you a little history, I was scared to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I always wanted to do it when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I watch, like sports players and, actors and stuff like that. They always have personal chefs.
Yeah.
And I said, man, I wish I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I was scared. I was
Okay.
scared to take that jump, that
Okay.
leap. And so I was always selling myself short.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout time and more training, there was something that came up in the beginning of 2020 and the end of 2019 called COVID that really shook the world up.
Mm-hmm.
And when it shook the world up, it allowed people to either face their fears or run. For me, I was able to face it. I was just walking away from a restaurant that I closed down, and I needed to reinvent myself.
Mm-hmm.
COVID allowed that to happen. COVID allowed me to take that leap, that jump, and say, you have to do something different.
Right.
You come too far to walk away.
Right.
So I didn't want to be in the restaurant world at the time, but I still wanted to utilize the skills and the gifts that God blessed me with.
Right.
But I needed to do it on a different stage, a different platform.
Well, I think you're right about that. I think COVID definitely was that push for so many people to say now is the time, because when you're in a life and death situation where you see people, unfortunately losing their lives, you realize just how precious your life is. And you do that self-analysis and say, am I making the most of the opportunities that I have? Am I reaching, maximizing my potential? And so I definitely think that, those conversations, I think you were not alone in having them, and you took that leap, and it's proven to be very successful for you. Where do your clients are they based? Are they based in the Berkshires? Are they based outside of the Berkshires?
Most of my clients are outside of the Berkshires
Okay.
in the Capital District.
Okay.
Over in near Albany, and a good friend that used to come, and when I was in Saratoga Springs, New York, and he would come and he would just say, "Chef, cook me whatever. I don't want what's on the menu."
Right.
So when I started advertising years later, my cooking classes, he jumped on it. When he jumped on it, he had a party. We did like 7 of his friends, and from that it just led to another one, to another one, to another one, and it just kept going.
So word of mouth.
A lot of word of mouth.
Okay.
So in the capital region was awesome.
Okay.
And then here in the Berkshires, it started picking up some traction.
Okay.
And so I'm doing pretty well.
Oh, I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
That's excellent. I mean, I know that you mentioned the restaurant, and I just wanted to just pivot a little bit to that, because after your experience in the restaurants that we talked about initially, you opened your first restaurant, Big Daddy's Philly Steakhouse, in 2017, right? And that was in Adams, I believe. And then you also went on to open another location in Pittsfield. And so obviously you brought your love of Philly cheesesteaks to the region. But when you transitioned from the restaurants, what were some of the takeaways that you took when you closed that chapter in your life?
Follow my dream.
Okay.
Opening up a cheesesteak restaurant wasn't my dream.
Okay.
2006, I came up here to originally help a chef named Doug Love open up a restaurant called Spice. It was there before J Spice. And my father brought me back up here. He was my biggest advocate. And he, as we're driving down, he was like, man, I just want a sandwich. And there wasn't a lot of restaurants open back in 2006 here in Pittsfield. And he says, where can we get it? I said, I don't know. He looked at me. He said, when you make it, open up a cheesesteak and hoagie shop. Show the Berkshires what a real sandwich is all about. So my father being bend over backwards, drive across the world for me.
Right.
When the opportunity came, I gave him his joy.
Right.
He always wanted that.
Okay.
And we always talked about it as me growing up as a kid.
Right.
So, you know, I was like, you know, I'm going to do this. And I did it for my dad, you know, and it turned out beautiful. We had almost a 3-year run and, you know, a lot of ups and downs. But at the end of the day, it was great. And, you know, and then in 2019 when he died, it's when it was like, okay, you know, I didn't have the strength to finish his dream.
Right.
You know.
That's so interesting because for the love of your dad, you started the restaurant, but upon his passing, you realized that was his vision. And it's almost like through that experience, you realized that you almost needed to fulfill your own. But I think that, you know, from what I heard, you know, your cheesesteaks were legendary. Tell me a little bit about just the what you put into them, because I've never had a Philly cheesesteak. You know, I don't eat meat, so I probably will never have a Philly cheesesteak unless it's vegan. But there's something to be said about the Philly cheesesteak. What makes it so popular, and what was your signature flavor that you added to it?
Love and passion.
Okay. All right.
To be honest with you, a lot of people want to make a Philly cheesesteak and they use all different types of bread. What made the Philadelphia cheesesteak famous was a company named Amoroso.
Okay.
It was their rolls. It was an Italian bakery at 55th and Thomas Avenue, right in the neighborhood that I grew up. And as a kid, I used to ride my bike up to the factory and get the rolls off the conveyor belt, fresh, hot.
Wait, how were you able to just roll up and just get bread from the conveyor belt?
The factory was right there.
Okay.
I would ride my bike up to the back of the factory, and the guys would just give me bread.
Neighborhood kid, right?
A neighborhood kid,
all right.
You know, and you know, I didn't just sneak into the factory, you know, but they knew why I was coming there,
right.
You know? And those were the rolls.
Okay.
And there was companies that came up after that started to duplicate what that company was doing. But those are the rolls that made the cheesesteak. It wasn't always just the meat.
Okay.
It wasn't a special ingredient. I had salt and pepper. That's it.
Really?
Salt and pepper. It's the rolls. I imported my rolls from Philadelphia.
Okay, so it was the bread.
Yes, that's what it's all about. People tell you the bread makes the sandwich. And when it comes down to the Philly cheesesteak, that is the number one difference. Now, you got to have the meat right, shaved ribeye, you know, you got to have the meat right, but you have to have the roll.
So it's a whole package.
It is the whole package, but it starts out with the bread.
I think that's actually like a metaphor that could actually be adapted to other things in life, right? Just having a stable foundation. If your foundation is strong and you build upon it, you're going to have something that can stand the test of time. You know, thinking about that cheesesteak, you know, if your bread is not good, then the whole sandwich, just throw it all away. Just throw it all away. Well, maybe you can tell me where I can get a good vegan cheesesteak. I'm looking at your face and you're like... No, I can't.
You can make a good veggie cheesesteak at home. You don't want a vegan one. You just make a veggie. I used to serve a veggie cheesesteak.
Okay.
It was very popular.
Okay, so we'll talk after the interview, and you can tell me what I need to do to make a good veggie cheesesteak, and then I'll take pictures of it and I'll send it to you.
Well, you know I'm for hire.
Well, that is true. I'll just hire you to make my veggie cheesesteaks. There you go. So the crisis has been solved. I'll get my veggie cheesesteak. I want to ask you a little bit about just your personal philosophy, because on your website, you state you bring your love of food and people to all that you do. And you make it very clear that you're more than an executive chef. You're more than a personal chef. You also cite teacher and mentor. And, for someone with your talent, you could have stopped at the food part. You could have said, I'm good, I'm successful. But why is it important for you to add those two roles to your professional website? And then to speak a little bit about your community affiliations.
Growing up, life wasn't easy. So I grew up in a drug-infested, alcohol-infested, bouncing between mom and dad. Times mom wasn't around, and even when dad was there, he wasn't around because he was constantly working. So life wasn't easy growing up. I was homeless at one point. Fire hydrant on my corner was my source of water at one point. So as I grew up, I always said, I'm going to do the best I can and work as hard as I can, never to have to go back to that. Mm-hmm. Once I had a child, I vowed to myself to never allow my son to experience what I went through. When I became a writer, because in college I started writing, and then I became a published writer, and I won some awards and traveled the country with writing. I've noticed that it was the writing that allowed me to take it to the next level, allowed me to see the light through the darkness. It was the writing that allowed me to breathe from the suffocating circumstances of life that I was going through. Mm-hmm. In 2006, I was able to go down to West Springfield YMCA and teach young kids how to write, who suffered from a loss of a loved one through gun violence. And I realized my writing helped them open up and helped them breathe. Mm-hmm. And they was able to now talk about what they were holding in.
Right.
So I utilized that tool in later years to help out. In 2017, I was invited to come to Hoosick Valley High School and help out with a writing class. Mm-hmm. And those kids, graduated with better grades after working with me for 2 semesters.
Right.
And it was this awesome feeling. I never wanted to get into teaching. I always wanted to be a mentor because I wanted to be what I didn't have. Mm. So I wanted to what I seek for as a child, that guidance, that growing up in the hood, a young black man that would show me the way.
Yeah.
Instead, I had guys on the street corners and
Right.
stuff like that. But I wanted to see a positive image. So because I didn't have that positive image outside of my father,
Right.
who later years became my biggest advocate, my biggest pusher, my biggest supporter, but when I wanted to become what these young men didn't have, and it wasn't just for the black man, it was for the white, the Asian, the Spanish,
Right.
whoever. I wanted to just be that.
Anyone who needed it.
Anyone that needed it, because the color of your skin doesn't stop you from the circumstances of life.
Right. Right.
It doesn't stop you. So we all go through it. So here in the Berkshires, the opportunity came. Jake McCandless called me, asked me if I would come into Taconic High School.
Right.
That led me into Reed Middle School. And I was like, wow, doors opened up. When God gives you a gift, you can't sit on it. And it was a gift that I didn't know I had until I decided to activate it and tap into it. Mm-hmm. So what use is it to me if I don't use it?
Right. How do you balance your professional endeavors right now with the community work that means so much to you?
I wish I knew that answer, because it's crazy, I just keep going. I really don't know. I don't sit down much.
Okay.
I really don't sit down. And before COVID, I was working with affiliate with the Boys and Girls Club, helping out. At one point was with Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
Just trying my best to help out wherever I could. I used to, have a mentorship called Excel where, I was working with not just kids, but young adults also. That kind of, the mentorship kind of faded away.
Yeah.
But what I was doing didn't. I continue to keep going.
Right.
And then I use social media to really talk to people every day.
Okay.
I put a message out there
Okay.
so that somebody can read it.
What are your messages about?
My message is about overcoming your fears.
Okay.
My message is about bettering yourself. Everything is always positive.
Okay.
And how to be successful. I mean, your success is not defined by the level you at or how much money, but your success is defined by doing what you love.
That's right. I think if people would just understand that, because it really has nothing to do with the bank account, because you can have so much money and be miserable. So many people get up, every day and go to a job that they hate. And they might make a ton of money, but they're not happy. And so I think, back to the pandemic, I mean, it has really allowed people to really just, think about their priorities, think about what matters to them, and realizing that with the time we have, right, make, the use of it, make good use of it, and live a meaningful life, and so I think that, I'm a big proponent of mentorship. I believe in it because I had mentors growing up outside of my family. And I do believe in that village concept because it's so important. And I think now more so with, kids and so many influences and distractions, I think it's so important for youth just to have so many people in their lives who can just, encourage them and uplift them. But before our time runs out, I want to ask you, who or what inspires you?
Who or what inspires me? My father. I mean, even though he's gone, I watch my father work like crazy to make sure that I had a better life. And he drove all over this country. He was a big-time driver. And I took that in and I said, I'm going to do the same thing, but I have to do it different. My son travels with me to work a lot.
Is he like your assistant?
Yeah. So when I do a lot of my private cooking, my son is right there. He goes to my classes right there with me because I want him to see what I see.
Right.
I wanted him to see what I witnessed, and that was, society always say that black men don't work. I was raised by a black man who worked, and he wasn't there a lot
because he was working.
Right. So for me, I didn't want that part of it. So my son, that's where my inspiration comes from.
And what, if you had to choose one word to describe yourself, what would that one word be?
Water.
Water. Why?
I learned a long time ago to live by the quote that Bruce Lee once said, that everybody should be like water. Water can form to anything. It adapts to anything. It can take over anything. It can penetrate. So I learned to live my life to be able to adapt to every circumstance, to be able to fit in where need be. So when you ask me that question, what one thing, name something about me, it's to be like water. Wow. It's to be, even when water dissipates, and it dissipates into the air so that we breathe it in and we recycle it, So it's just very important for me to always take that analogy and put it into my life.
That is so profound. Thank you, Xavier. I thoroughly enjoyed today's interview. I wish we had more time, but that's always the case on Backstory. We have some tremendous guests who have great stories. And I just want to thank Xavier for joining us today. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back with our next guest, Cindy Brown, who is the Associate Commissioner of Regulatory and Veterans Affairs at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. Thanks, everyone.
The Berkshire's only rock station, 89.7 WTBR-FM, Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
89.7 WTBR-FM is proud to announce our third annual one-day on-air fundraiser. The event will take place on Thursday, November 18th from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Don't miss our guests, including local dignitaries and your friends and neighbors from the community. There'll be plenty of incentives you can win, including restaurant gift certificates, tickets to local cultural attractions, and much more. And for each donation of $25 or more, you'll be in the running to win a Thanksgiving feast from KJ Nosh Catering on Tyler Street in Pittsfield. You can make your donation right now at WTBRFM.com. Don't miss the third annual one-day on-air fundraiser, live from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Thursday, November 18th, only on 89.7 WTBR-FM and all day live on the WTBR Facebook page. Thank you for supporting Pittsfield Community Radio.
Hey, this is Chief Wynn with the Pittsfield Police Department and Lieutenant Gary Traversa. Hey, Gary.
Hey, Chief.
We just want to remind all of our listeners and viewers to tune in every Friday for On Patrol with the PPD here on WTBR 89.7 FM, Pittsfield Community Radio, and also on Pittsfield Community Television. Right, Gary?
Don't miss Friday mornings, 9 a.m. on WTBR-FM. All the happenings at the Pittsfield Police Department.
On Patrol with the PPD here on WTBR 89.7 FM.
WTBR. We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on 89.7 WTBR-FM with Roberta McCulloch-Dews of the Mayor's Office in the city of Pittsfield. Thanks for tuning in. So another round of thanks to Xavier Jones, executive and personal chef, teacher, and mentor. He was awesome. And now we have Cindy Brown. So Cindy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Roberta.
All right. So you are the Associate Commissioner of Regulatory and Veterans Affairs at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, and you're also the president of the Berkshire County Historical Society at Arrowhead. So we're going to talk about both roles shortly. But first, let's share a little bit about your background. So you lived in Pittsfield for 12 years?
That's right.
Okay, but you grew up in Granby. Okay.
Which is in the Connecticut River Valley in the Five College area.
Okay.
Sort of between South Hadley and Amherst.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if folks know like the Springfield area, is it outside of Springfield?
Yeah, a little north.
Little north. Okay. Yeah. So do you still have roots there and do you get back?
Sure. I do get back. I have family throughout the valley. I see an aunt and uncle in Franklin County quite a bit.
Okay.
And then I do have relatives right in the area too that I keep up with on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now that COVID's pretty much passed, we'll try to be making a few more trips to see people in person.
Well, let's hope it's passed for good.
Let's hope so.
I know.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. So being that you've been in Pittsfield for 12 years, you've moved here for work, what do you love best about the city?
I think the variety of things there is to do here. Mm-hmm. You know, you can have a really urban experience, a cultural experience, but there's a lot of natural beauty, ways to get outdoors, lots of outdoors activities, lots of unique kinds of things here.
Okay.
And you can do them all in the same day.
Right. That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. So let's talk a little bit about your current position because it sounds so interesting and it sounds very important. So please tell me more about this role.
Yeah. So I oversee or collaborate on a lot of program review and policy work. So, for example, applications for new institutions of higher education come through my function. And I'm also involved in monitoring contingency planning for institutions that may be struggling a little bit in the Commonwealth. I oversee the Veterans Affairs Office. The Department of Higher Ed administers the federal contract for veterans' educational benefits, typically called the GI Bill benefits. And so this includes oversight of all kinds of educational opportunities. So in addition to college, apprenticeship programs, flight schools.
Wow.
About 250 programs that are eligible to administer veterans benefits throughout the Commonwealth.
That's a pretty vast territory.
It is. And there are about 300,000 veterans in Massachusetts. It's about 6% of the population of Massachusetts. Most people don't realize that.
Yeah.
And about 11,000 of those veterans accessed some kind of educational benefit last year. So it's a really important role.
Wow.
Overseeing compliance, making sure that everyone's following the regulations, that there's no fraud or waste.
Right.
And I've learned a lot. I mean, I knew something about it, but I've learned an awful lot overseeing this function.
Well, I mean, it's important work. I mean, I think two components: one, higher education, but also our veterans too.
That's right.
So I think it's a very significant intersection. But you're well acquainted with the field of higher education because your background pretty much is centered in higher education.
That's right. Yeah.
And you have a PhD in the history of American civilization, and your past institutions. You've worked at MCLA, and you had a long-standing career at Lesley, universities. So, I mean, this is sort of your territory. So coming into the role at the state was like, I'm sure you had to learn the lay of the land, but it wasn't like totally unfamiliar.
No, and I was able to bring skills and experiences from all of my past roles to bear, especially now in the time of COVID when our work has been remote for so long. One of the things I did at Lesley University was oversee a lot of national programs that were taking place on the ground in other states throughout the United States, and did a lot of that work on the phone and over email. This is pre-Zoom,
right?
Pre-video conferencing,
of course.
And so I learned a lot about how to do that effectively, and those are skills that came right back up during this unexpected time of remote work.
There's something to be said about sort of amassing the arsenal, I should say, of skills, because you never know when you're going to need them.
That's right, and you can repurpose yourself many times.
Right.
But fundamentally, higher education is about forming and maintaining communities.
Right.
And communities that have strong and positive values, and that's what I hope I've been able to do during my career.
So you work in an administrative leadership position now, but you got your start in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
As an assistant professor.
Yeah.
So do you ever miss teaching?
Well, I've managed to keep my hand in.
Okay.
So right now, for example, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Berkshire County Historical Society in Arrowhead, but I volunteer as a docent there in addition to my board responsibilities. So I give tours.
Do you?
I do.
And do you say I'm the president of the? Or do
I
you
usually do.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, because I say if I can answer other questions about the Berkshires, I'd like to do that. Because I try to put Arrowhead and Herman Melville and everything into context, a wider context.
Interesting. Well, we're definitely going to get into the Berkshire Historical Society angle, because there's tons of interesting tidbits that you're going to want to learn about. But I just want to, just quickly ask a couple of questions just about your role in academia. And one of the things is you've authored 2 books, and you've contributed to chapters in 2 others. And regarding one of the latter books, Women Administrators in Higher Education, Historical and Contemporary Perspectives, you contributed a chapter on the patterns of leadership, the impact of female authority in 4 women's colleges from 1880 to 1910. And what would you say, I'm curious to know, as you are now an administrator, right? You've been an administrator in higher ed, and you've now pivoted into, state government. But what would you say were some of the biggest impacts at the time, and have they stood the test of time today?
Yeah, so I would say that women had, and to some extent still have, a lot of challenges when they lead in education, in higher education, and in any area really in our culture. And women also have had to seek out opportunities to develop their skills and leadership, particularly in areas like finance, where they're underrepresented, which is still the case, as we know. Right. So it was a lot harder to do this in the 19th century, early 20th century, the period that my work, my dissertation and my chapter work covered. But it's taken a really long time to change. And I would say the fact we've had to wait until 2021, this very day, to elect a woman as mayor of Boston and a woman as mayor of North Adams,
Right.
shows us what kind of work we still have to do when it comes to women in leadership.
Right. Absolutely. I think that definitely it's important to, to acknowledge the strides, but to also acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm always a firm believer that representation matters, and the whole windows and mirrors concept, right? When it's important to see it. And when people see it, the more often they see it, then they can understand, one, the power and the significance and buy into it. So that's tremendous. I want to switch gears because I think you're really excited to talk about the Berkshire Historical Society.
I am.
So let's switch gears a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about your role as board president. You've been involved with the group since September, and you've been board president as of May 2019. Considering the nature of your doctorate, this seems to be a perfect fit. So for those who may not have any awareness about Arrowhead or even the Berkshire Historical Society, can you give us the docent primer?
Sure. So the Berkshire County Historical Society has been around since 1962, so our 60th anniversary is next year. And since 1975, when the Society purchased Arrowhead, it's had a dual mission of both interpreting and preserving the history and culture of Berkshire County, and also of interpreting Arrowhead, which is where Herman Melville lived with his family from 1850 till 1863, where he rewrote and published Moby Dick, and then went on to have his most productive years as an author. So most of the short fiction that we know him for, Bartleby the Scrivener, Benito Cereno, The Encantadas, Piazza Tales, he wrote at Arrowhead.
Really?
Yeah. And many of those short stories, particularly the Piazza Tales, have Berkshire themes or are about people or things that he experienced in the Berkshires. And I think most people don't realize that.
Interesting. Do you think that where do you think they think he wrote it?
New York. He was born in New York.
Oh.
His mother's family is from New York, Dutch family in New York. And New York City claims him very proudly. Also upstate. He has significant connections to Troy and Albany.
Okay.
So I think most people think of him as a New Yorker.
Really?
Yeah.
So how then to raise the profile of Arrowhead and Melville? If that's the case, if Arrowhead is almost in the shadows, what do you guys have in mind to raise his that profile?
Well, we have done a lot more programming, and we're going to do more now that as we discussed, COVID is, we hope, past us. But it's to bring interpretations, it's to bring artists and other creatives to Arrowhead and sort of reactivate that piece of Arrowhead's history. So we collaborate with the Mastheads Project here in Pittsfield, and the Masthead Studios are more or less permanently on the property now.
I was going to say, if anyone has ever driven by and you look into the distance in the fields, they almost look like little cabins.
Yeah, like little black studio cabins. Yeah. So think of Thoreau, in the woods around Walden.
Right.
And people can rent those, and that's where the fellows, the Mastheads fellows in the summer, do their work. This past summer it was 2 weeks, but in the past it's been a month.
Well, I can't think of a better COVID-19 safety protocol friendly place.
You know what? It was.
Than the cabin.
It was.
Right.
Yeah. So we have that connection. We hosted a new play called Rewritten this past summer that was performed for the first time at Arrowhead, which is about the relationship between Nathaniel Hawthorne and Herman Melville. Very important relationship that got its start and played out to a large degree here in the Berkshires. And it was a very successful play. We hope to bring it back. Okay. It's now being performed around the state. They've got a couple of other dates booked in other parts of the state. So it's really, I think that part of the profile. And then I think most people don't know that we have 45 acres associated with the house and barns. And it's all part of the original farm that he bought, that Herman Melville bought. We have some walking trails. We're trying to do some more interpretive things with the property. We're going to put in a demonstration apple orchard.
Wow.
Focused on types for cider, and we're going to have a partnership with one of the cideries in the county to provide apples. Because cider's big.
Cider is huge.
Cider's big. Maybe not as big as marijuana, but it's pretty big.
Right. Right.
It's pretty big.
Right. That is true. Listen, people are very committed to their apple orchards, especially in the fall.
They are.
They are.
Yeah. So we're excited about that. The trees have been ordered. They're going in the spring.
Wow.
We also got a U.S. DOA grant, Department of Agriculture grant, to put in a pollinator habitat on part of the fields that we have.
So will this mean then that, like, once the trees are in bloom, that people can go there and pick apples and get cider? Or?
We're probably going to try to keep the apples on the trees for the cider project to come and get.
Cider.
But posing, we might allow people to do sort of windfalls. But we have to sort of see how it goes. It's going to take a few years.
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things that we've all, just in, thinking about the pandemic and just thinking about how people have mastered the pivot, collaborations are so important.
Huge.
And what we've seen is that community organizations have partnered with one another to stay afloat, to grow, to maintain their relevancy, but also to create the experience. One of the things when I went onto the website, I didn't realize people could have parties there. They could have weddings.
Yeah, you can do rentals. We do rentals now.
Who knew?
I know. We just started.
Oh, okay.
We just started that. Yeah. And again, people are really, this is a newer thing to want to be in a barn or be in a more naturalistic setting for some of these events. And we have a really good way to do that. We hosted the Berkshire Museum's annual gala this past summer because they were still under construction.
Right.
And so we had about 250, 300 people on site. We tented it. They tented it.
Yeah.
Worked out really well, I think. They were pleased with it. We opened up the barn so you could be in and out of the barn. And
right.
Out of but it's a really and you have beautiful views. You have beautiful views of Mount Greylock.
It really is a beautiful place.
Yeah, yeah.
When you're because I have toured Arrowhead, full disclosure, I've been there.
Excellent.
And when you look at where his write-in desk is, and you look out into the distance, and I could be getting this wrong, but is there some kind of folklore over the shape of the mountain and how it might look like the whale?
Yes.
Okay, so talk about folklore. That.
Yeah, so he writes about it, and other people write about it.
Okay, all right, so it's true.
When he saw it, and when he looked at it, he was reminded often of the back of a whale.
Right, all right, good, because I'm like, I know I got it from somewhere.
Yeah. Probably from the tour.
Yes, I mean it's great. I mean I love history. So I've had an opportunity. This was pre-COVID to take one of the tours and just see these live-in dwellings. Now the thing is that these places are so small. Mm-hmm. When you look back, I often think about like how tall were individuals back then, not only in height but width, because I feel like people were just short and small.
They were. I mean, if you look at Civil War enlistment records for men who enlisted in the Civil War, 5'4", 5'5", very unusual to get much taller than 5'8", 5'10".
Wow.
And people were shorter. I mean, people had, the nutrition was, not as good.
Right.
Childhood diseases.
Right.
Other factors, people were shorter.
Yeah, I mean, when you see the beds, right?
Yeah.
And you're it really drives the point home that, people obviously look different. I say that to say because the Berkshire County, Historical Society owns about 6,000 objects related to the history of Berkshire County. And so you can expect to see, fine and decorative arts, household and industrial artifacts, costumes and accessories. And so if you go on the website, you'll see some of the items that they have. They have like the wedding dress that belonged to Louise Crane, which was, again, small.
Yeah.
Little.
Tiny.
Mm-hmm. Tiny. I look at that and I'm astounded. You have a toy cupboard that belonged to Herman Melville's youngest daughter, Frances Melville. And then there is a very large cider press, which has a connection to a founding father and a former U.S. president. So could you talk a little bit about that cider press?
Yeah. So the cider press was used to make a giant wheel of cheese.
Okay.
By supporters of President-elect Thomas Jefferson in 1801, in the summer of 1801. And they did this to show their support as Federalists. Now, he ran and defeated John Adams, who was the local, right? He was John Adams from Massachusetts, from Quincy, Massachusetts. So here's a group of Federalists supporting Jefferson, sending this giant wheel of cheese to Washington, D.C. It was presented in part by the then minister of the Baptist Church in Cheshire. And they sent a long note that you can read online as part of the Jefferson Papers. And I wanted to read a little bit of that to you because it also is a little bit of a dig at Jefferson. So, the cheese was produced by the personal labor of freeborn farmers with the voluntary and cheerful aid of their wives and daughters without the assistance of a single slave.
Oh.
It was originally intended for an elective president of a free people and with a principal view of casting a mite into the even scale of federal democracy. We hope it will safely arrive at its destined place and that its quality will prove to be such as may not disappoint the wishes of those who made it.
What an interesting note.
Isn't it?
What an interesting note.
Isn't it?
Was it important for them to bring out the point that no enslaved person had assisted in the aid of this cheese?
I think it was. And, no one that I know of has made this connection, but not too long before this happened, there was quite a bit of back and forth between members of this church and a former member of the church who had moved to New York State about whether or not he had in fact freed enslaved children of husband and wife that he had already freed and who remained behind in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And this Baptist church, I think, was championing the cause of emancipation.
Right.
And, of course, Thomas Jefferson owned enslaved people, continued to enslave people through his presidency. We know that part of the story.
Right.
So...
So it was almost like, was it a dig? Or
I think it was, even though they supported him.
Yeah.
It's like, well, but do the right thing.
Right.
As
in the most polite way.
Right.
Right, of course, because, it drove the message home. But obviously, I picked up on it. So
yeah.
I'm sure Thomas Jefferson was a, very smart man. I'm sure he could pick up on the undertones.
That's right.
Very interesting. So if people want to, in addition to just these artifacts, how can they learn more? Do they just visit the website and
they can visit the website? Yeah. You can, if you would like to become a member, you can come and do research in the archives. You can commission research in the archives, see if we've got something that's related to a question or a topic that you're interested in. We do lend artifacts to exhibits, and, we host a small exhibit during the season, usually in the small barn, and we've done other exhibits around the city. So we are trying to let people know what we have.
Right.
We were on the path of doing more school visits and actually taking sort of museum in a box, exhibits in a box kind of thing. We hope to get back to that as the protocols are such that we can do that. And that's really because schools are less able perhaps to provide transportation, but if we go to the schools, we can do sort of in-classroom visits, which is helpful, I think.
I have to, one of my personal favorite movies is Glory. I remember when Glory first came out.
Yeah, I do too.
And I am enthralled by the 54th Regiment, so much so that I had reached out to the Athenaeum and said, what, do you have a record of people who are from the area who served in the Civil War? Do you have anything similar about the 54th Regiment? And explain who the 54th Regiment is for folks who may not know.
Yeah, so the 54th Regiment, there were a number of regiments that were raised called USCT or U.S. Colored Troop Regiments during the Civil War. The first of these, and sort of the pioneer one of these, was the Massachusetts 54th. It's a very long story. It's told really well in Glory, and there are several books about it. But basically, it was it had to be brought forward by abolitionists to do this as a proof of concept that black men could be effective soldiers, could learn how to do the things soldiers needed to do, and would be, acceptable as soldiers in the U.S. Army. And it involved a lot of a sacrifice. It also involved a lot of communication and use of networks in the Black community, not only in Massachusetts, but throughout
Right.
The Union states to enlist men into various regiments.
Right.
And there were also men who enlisted in the Navy, right? So, there was a U.S. 5th Cavalry, Heavy Cavalry Regiment, and then a spillover regiment in Massachusetts, the 55th, Massachusetts 55th.
There's a Massachusetts 55th?
Yes, there was.
We never hear about them.
I know. You don't hear about the 5th Cavalry either.
No.
But many men from the Berkshires and elsewhere served in those regiments as well. And so I'm engaged in this long project to try and put together more information about Black people in Berkshire County before 1865. And one of the things I've been trying to do is, recapture the men who actually enlisted in these additional regiments in these additional ways and participated as soldiers and sailors in the war. It's
so interesting to me. I mean, I just love history. And when I looked at the documents that I received from the library, and I looked at basically just the list, it showed like their professions, and it was like farmer, laborer, blacksmith. These were not people that were these were regular people that said, I want to serve because this is important to me.
Yeah. And some of these men had been enslaved, were born into slavery, had been enslaved, and either were self-emancipated, ran away, or were emancipated during the various stages of emancipation. Not all of them were born free. And so they were taking an even larger risk in many ways by enlisting. And the movie, I think, makes that point well.
It does.
You have a mixture of freeborn Black men and enslaved Black men, which is the way that it was.
Right.
Yeah.
There's definitely a dichotomy, and I'm not giving any spoilers for anyone who's never seen Glory. I mean, it's been out since 1990.
It's been out a long time.
Yeah. But yeah, you could see with Thomas, who was from, the character of Thomas was from Boston, right? And then, then men who were from the South. And I mean, it just, because obviously when they marched into the South, they saw different troops, and you could see the difference between those who may have gone into it, who were maybe just coming out of slavery, versus those who may have lived an existence outside of that institution. So it's a really great movie, but learning about actual individuals who actually served, I think, is tremendously powerful. Is there anything at the Historical Society that one could look into to learn more?
We don't have anything collected yet. I think that's one of the things that we want to try to do is provide more information. I do want to do a call out to the Samuel Harrison Society and the work that they've done to preserve and interpret the life and contributions of Reverend Samuel Harrison.
Powerful. He was a chaplain.
He was a chaplain for the 54th, and in fact was one of the leaders of the movement for equal pay.
Right.
Which, if the movie ever got redone, which I don't think it needs to be, but if it ever did, I'd go back on that point.
Yes.
Because I think most people, again, have no understanding.
None.
That the pay was not equal. It took months and months and months.
Right.
It was finally done, but it took a lot of agitation.
Right.
To get President Lincoln, to agree to equal pay for Black soldiers.
I mean, if you think about the time, it was just rife with just so many different challenges, right?
Yeah,
and
that's
to advocate and to speak up at that time, I mean, we look at it through our modern lens, but if you think about it at the time, anyone who spoke up was taking a chance.
They were. And, the Dred Scott decision, and so the idea that Black people could be taken out of the free states and sold into slavery, back into slavery, that this was a very dangerous time for men in particular, but for men and women.
Right.
There was migration to Canada, including individuals from Pittsfield and other parts of the Berkshires who went into Canada during the 1850s to be safer during those Dred Scott years prior to the Civil War. Some of them migrated back to the States. Some of them stayed in Canada.
Yeah.
Because they didn't feel safe.
Yeah. Well, speaking about Pittsfield, in your research, I know you've done a ton of research about Pittsfield, and you've uncovered some things that may not be well known. Could you share a fact or two that our listeners would be surprised to learn about?
So, keeping with some of the themes that we've been talking about, which is from my research, I think it's important for people to know that Pittsfield was the center of a really long-standing Black community, starting in the 1760s, when Blacks made up about 3% of the overall population in the county. And that population, with very little exception, that percentage stayed in place until about 1860. And between 1820 and 1840, so the U.S. censuses of 1820, 1830, 1840, Berkshire County was second only to Suffolk County, which is where Boston is, in terms of numbers of Black people in the state. And I think most people assume that the other centers of Black population were somewhere else, North Shore maybe, Springfield.
It was here.
It was here. In 1840, in fact, Pittsfield and Sheffield were 6th and 7th in the number of Black people of the top 10 towns and cities in Massachusetts in terms of Black population.
Wow.
6th and 7th.
Wow, there's so much history, and I would encourage anyone. We've run out of time. This always happens when the conversation is so good, but I encourage everyone. Cindy, if people want to learn more, where can they go?
BerkshireHistory.org.
Okay.
Is our address.
Okay.
Samuel Harrison Society has their own address. The Clinton Church, Restoration.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great resources. Okay, everyone, you've been listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM with Pittsfield, with Roberta McCulloch-Dews of the Mayor's Office in the city of Pittsfield. Thank you, Cindy, and thanks, everyone. Have a great day.